Salve te omnes, it's Magister Compton, and we're down to our fourth and final tense of the subjunctive, and that's the pluperfect subjunctive. Again, as I said in the present video, there is no future perfect, because the subjunctive already is kind of there. So this is the only other tense we have to know. So we've got present, imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect. So how do you make a pluperfect active subjunctive? You start with the perfect active infinitive. So we just covered that a few chapters ago. And remember, that's the third part plus SSE. So like ama wisse, ke pisse, peci wisse, so on and so forth. And then, kind of like we did with the imperfect active, we just add the endings. So you've got that infinitive, you add the endings to it. The only difference is we don't give you we don't give you the perfect active infinitive. You still have to make that. But once you've made it, then you just add the endings and all is good. So here's what ama would look like as a pluperfect active subjunctive. So we got ama wisse 6 times. That's our perfect active infinitive. And then we've got mst, mustis, nt to make that the subjunctive. All right. So that's what a pluperfect active would look like. Third part plus SSE plus our 6 main endings, mst, mustis, nt. And then the pluperfect passive would be, again, a two-parter. So we start with the fourth principal part. Since we use the present subjunctive of sum to do the perfect passive subjunctive verb, this time we're going to take the imperfect of sum to make the pluperfect passive subjunctive. So this is why I showed you those back in the imperfect tense video. So here's what it would look like. Amatus or a or esem, and then esses, and then esset, and then amati or I or a, essemus, essetis, essent. So that's the pluperfect tense passive. So we've got these 4 tenses. When are you most likely to see any of these tenses? The imperfect, as I said, would be the most common. Next up, I would go with the pluperfect. Again, because we do so many things in past tense, that the pluperfect being something that would go along with past tense things would be a little bit more common. And again, there are certain clauses that only can use the pluperfect or the imperfect subjunctive. So there's a cum clause called the cum temporal. Only can be imperfect or pluperfect subjunctive. So there's one. But then there are certain tenses there are certain clauses that can't use the pluperfect or the perfect at all. So that sort of reduces the pluperfect's visibility. Next up, I would say would be the present tense. Again, because we do so many things in past tense, you're not going to have a whole lot of scenarios where the present subjunctive is going to end up in a present tense sentence. I will say, if you're reading poetry, that's not so much the case. In poetry, you probably will see a lot more present subjunctive. But for most things that we read, the present's going to be probably the third most likely. And then the fourth would be our poor old perfect subjunctive. Again, there's lots of clauses that just can't use a perfect verb at all. And so the likelihood of it showing up is really small. When it does happen, we almost kind of have to stop and think, is this a perfect subjunctive or is this a future perfect indicative? And so we have to pay attention. Is it in a clause? Do we have a scenario where the perfect subjunctive would make sense? And if that's the case, okay, yeah, we have that. But yeah, it's sort of the odd man out. It's the least used of the 4 tenses. So again, in order in terms of use, imperfect's the most used, then I would say pluperfect, then present, and then the poor old perfect tense for the last most used. And that's it. That's our 4 subjunctive tenses. So from here on out, we're going to talk about what we use them for. So the kind of clauses, the kind of scenarios where the subjunctive is put into action. All right? So until then, we're going to be done with chapter 42's grammar. And I say to you one last time, Valete omnes.